Hello and welcome to SEO Ranking's Do Follow podcast. Here we hold regular talks with SEO and digital marketing experts to discuss how to SEO topics and share actionable insights with the SEO community. So subscribe to stay on top of everything going on in SEO. Today we're going to be talking about mastering analytics for agencies, insights from GA4 and beyond. To help us understand this topic a bit better, at least because I understand there's just so much to unpack when it comes to analytics. Yeah, to help us understand the topic a little bit better, we've invited an experienced SEO and analytics expert, coach and trainer, the founder of Kickpoint Playbook, president and partner of Kickpoint, a professional speaker, and it looks like our time is up. No, I'm kidding. And the technology columnist for CBC Edmonton, amongst other things, Dana DiTomaso. Welcome, Dana. Great to have you with us. And I'm really excited to have our talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a lot of titles. I agree. We're probably out of time now.
This is my first question. I want to give you an opportunity to say a bit more about your background, how you got into digital marketing and eventually focused more on analytics. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to let you share with the audience your background.
Yeah, so I have a degree in geography, which I use every day, obviously, in my current career. And I worked in ecosystem restoration. But when I graduated from university back in the dark days of the 90s, there just weren't a lot of jobs in my field. So I ended up working in software, which led me to building websites. And I started freelance building websites in 2000. Before even WordPress, I was using Dreamweaver. If older folks listening to this, you're familiar with the flat file Dreamweaver.
I've actually used that before. In 2004, when I was doing a course at my university, that was the program we had to use.
Yep, totally. So I built websites using Dreamweaver. I still have one website with Dreamweaver still, and it loads fast. It's great on Core Web Vitals, because of course it is. But so I did that for a while, and then I ended up getting into SEO because one of my first clients said to me, "Why is my website not showing up on Google?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll get back to you." And it turns out I really enjoyed SEO, so I switched over to doing SEO. Had an agency back in Hamilton where I grew up, and then started Kickpoint with my business partner Jen in 2012. And so we were focusing on SEO at the beginning, a bit of PPC, and then slowly started to broaden our offerings. And then around 2016, 2017, we started getting more, issues about reporting, basically like making better reports, trying to figure out what was doing well for us and what wasn't. And that's when I started getting into analytics more. And that became, something that I really enjoy, something that I'm good at. And so my focus has really shifted over the years to doing almost entirely full-time analytics. But I still have this, obviously, like long-standing SEO background. I've been doing this for 24 years now. So it's something where I still keep an eye in the SEO world. I still do technical SEO audits in particular. And it's something that I still think about quite a bit. And I think that expertise really helps me in terms of figuring out how to report, because I'm not just coming at it from an analyst perspective, I'm coming at it from an SEO perspective.
And I would like to learn a bit more about Kickpoint Playbook, or just Kickpoint, and what you do there. What is the work involved? Just to share with the audience a bit more about.
Yeah, so Kickpoint is where we started. So this is a digital marketing agency. So we do website development, SEO, PPC, content creation, especially local SEO. Liz, our director of SEO, is fantastic in the local SEO scene. And we do all of that. And then my business partner, Jen, and I were talking about how I started over COVID in 2020 rather. I got contacted by LinkedIn to do courses on LinkedIn Learning. And so I now have 6 courses on that platform now. And it's been a really great experience, and something that I've always really enjoyed is speaking. You mentioned I do a lot of speaking engagements. I started speaking industry conferences in 2012, and it's something I really enjoy doing. And so working on these courses with LinkedIn Learning was such a great experience. Like, I should make up my own courses as well, just in analytics. And what was also happening, of course, was GA4, everyone's favorite analytics tool. And so it was just this idea of, I'm starting to do a lot more teaching and training, and GA4 is coming and nobody is prepared for it. And so that's where Kickpoint Playbook came from. And the idea of Kickpoint Playbook was, we want to be a learning platform for people who are, really in many different stages of their careers, who need, just maybe they're solo in-house and they just want to feel a little bit less alone with like a problem that they have, or they're Googling how to search, like fix one specific weird little thing, or they just want to have a community of other professionals that they can talk to about their problems. And right now we have courses strictly around analytics and reporting, with analytics for agencies and practical GA4, but we're going to have more courses coming out around things like doing website discovery projects. When you start working with clients or marketing discovery projects, keyword research, etc. I'm working on a mini course right now that's going to be just all about doing GA4 audits, specifically start to finish. So there is a lot of different stuff that we have planned. And it's something where, everyone on the Kickpoint team is contributing in a different way with their own expertise to Playbook. That's been a really fun project.
I want to make the segue to GA4 and sort of start breaking down the topic that we have assigned for this talk. And the first question I have is just basically addressing the biggest changes that we have from Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4. I realize that maybe they're not even supposed to be compared. That's not the best way to go about that. But since this is the reality that about 4 years ago, they started rolling out GA4 and Universal Analytics has stopped working, has stopped collecting data through this year. So just to give our listeners who maybe not in touch with specifically with analytics and maybe they're just thinking about this, what is the most significant difference between the two tools that Google rolled out to help us keep track of analytics on websites and apps?
Yeah, I think Google almost did themselves a disservice implying that GA4 was an upgrade, because some people call Universal Analytics GA3, when really it's not. It is a completely different way of recording analytics, because the original Universal Analytics UA actually used to be called Urchin Analytics. And it's a tool that Google bought back, I think, in 2003, 2004 to measure website traffic. And Urchin Analytics was a paid tool back in the beginning. And so that's why it's called UA, is they just wanted to keep Urchin Analytics. It's just, now it's Universal Analytics. It's just like, it's not actually, it's just the UA name. And that tool was great for 2003, 2004. But how people use websites now, and there's apps and all sorts of other things we didn't have, 20 years ago, it was really starting to be a little creaky, let's say, a little aged. And part of it too was also this idea of consent management. When cookie consent was definitely not a thing we thought about 20 years ago, there was no ad blockers, there was not even tabs in browsers, right? It was a very different landscape to what we have today. And GA4, I think, does a great job of taking things like consent and app and web, bringing that together and all that sorts of stuff. Like their event management in terms of how they record events and everything else is great. But because it was sort of positioned as an upgrade from Universal to GA4, I think that that's really where the major mistake was, because people were just expecting a fancier Universal Analytics, when in reality it is a complete redo of analytics. And so because of that, it's not an upgrade. It's sort of, here's a new tool that has the same name and doesn't have all the same features that this other tool did, because this is new. And I think this is where Google really didn't help themselves. And the timing was also terrible. There's this global pandemic going on. People are already stressed out. And now you want me to change everything about how I report to clients, like my basic livelihood, especially if you're on the agency side. No, I don't have time for this, right? And Google, I think, also really built GA4 for analysts. It's a fantastic collection tool. It is not a great reporting tool. And if you had all these custom reports set up for yourself in UA, and then you go over to GA4 and you're like, where's all my stuff? And it was a real struggle. And then I think the other thing too is that GA4 and UA measure things differently. How they reported on users is different. How they reported on sessions is different. And so if you, as you should have, had UA and GA4 running at the same time during the transition, and you went and looked at the reports in UA and you said, well, it says I have this many users, and you go over to GA4 and it says, well, this says I have this many users. One of these is wrong. Obviously GA4 is new and therefore it must be wrong. But the reality is that they're both right. They're just measuring stuff in different ways. And that's the other thing, like Google did not do a great job at communicating that either. And I think Google really had its hand forced by things like GDPR and consent, where instead of building into UA, they decided to just ditch UA entirely, go over to GA4. Consent's built in, saves them a ton of money and time. But the reality is that I think that they, lost a lot of, I don't know if goodwill is the right word, but they really irritated a lot of people by making them learn this new tool that is not necessarily the most user-friendly tool out there. And I always say, for me, my job is keeping up on GA4. I went on vacation for 2 weeks. 5 new features came out in those 2 weeks. It's like, my job is keeping up on this stuff. It is, if GA4 is something that you do on the side of your desk when you have time, I cannot imagine how you can possibly keep up. And so that's part of, when we do our newsletter or when I do my posts on, mostly on LinkedIn, I'm really thinking about those people where it's just like GA4 is one of the many, many things that they do, and they don't have the luxury of trolling through the updates to figure out what's going on. And I'm really trying to help those people out, and something that I do feel like Google is not necessarily doing the best job of right now. And I wish that they could.
Yeah, I'm among those people that you're trying to help out, because I remember we had to write an article about the transition from UA to GA4, and no content is out there. And we had to sit down with our analytics team and just sort of click on everything, try to figure out what is the corresponding thing from UA and GA4, and if it even exists.
Well, and sometimes things are named the same thing, but they don't measure the same stuff. And bounce rate is always such a good example, or bounce rate, for better or for worse, was a metric a lot of people looked at in UA. I don't think people actually knew what it was measuring in UA. In UA, bounce rate was measuring if somebody opened a page and then didn't do a measurable action. So let's say, for example, you have a form embedded on your page, and when people submit that form, they don't go to another page. It just shows a thank you message right there on the page. And you're not recording an event when people submitted that form. Someone could have submitted the form because they didn't go to another page. They would show up as a bounced visit because there was no recordable action that occurred. And then in GA4, what bounce rate is measuring is the inverse of the metric you've probably seen called engagement rate. And engagement rate is a session becomes engaged when somebody spends at least 10 seconds with your tab as their active tab, and you can up that to 60 seconds in the admin. They visit a second page, or they convert. And so that's where it's measuring something completely different. And then people try to compare them because they're named the same thing. That's fair that they try to compare them. Google should have named it something different, or better yet, not had bounce rate in GA4. Originally, bounce rate was not in GA4 and everybody freaked out. And so they said, fine, we'll put it in, but it won't be anything at all what it used to be. They should have just stuck to their guns and kept it out and said, you use engagement rate now. It's a better metric anyway.
Yeah, we actually had an article on the bounce rate, and instead of creating another one on the engagement rate, we sort of rewrote the other one and sort of mentions a couple of times that the bounce rate was not what we expected it to be, actually, and everybody was using it. So everybody was wrong, it turns out. You mentioned about the events-based model in GA4, and I wanted to understand how can agencies or businesses take advantage of this model to get more profound insights for their business?
Yeah, I think that this is where, if people are used to events in UA where it had that category action label method, there's things that we can record now in GA4 that I never would have tried recording in Universal Analytics because there wouldn't be a really good way to do it. And my go-to example I talk about a lot is, let's say we're working with this accounting firm and they wanted to record what people selected in drop-downs when people got in touch with them. And they had a drop-down for which office you wanted to talk to. They had a drop-down for what type of tax or accounting inquiry that they had. And then they had to drop down for their turnover or profit. If you're not in the UK, this is a UK company. And so we could record the answers to those drop downs as what are called parameters on the form submission event. And because they're parameters on an event, then we can say, load up all the information about every form submit, and we can filter and say people who select, 1 to 2 million pounds are more likely to be looking for this type of tax inquiry versus people who say they have 5 million or above, they're more looking for like international tax or whatever it might be. And then we can also relate that back to, what channel that they came in originally, organic search, Google business profiles, etc. And that kind of information, being able to record that in Universal Analytics would have been basically impossible because you can't record 4 pieces of data. So I think looking at your, what are the most important things on your website that you want people to do? What's the job you want people to complete when you're on their website? And are you recording when people do that job and any sort of other stuff that happened with that job? And this is where event parameters are really fantastic. You have an event of form submission, or you have an event that people clicked on the CTA button or whatever it might be, but then use parameters to further describe that event. So if people clicked, for example, on a call to action button, I could have a parameter that said location, and I could say it was in the body, or it was in the header, or it was in the footer, for example. It's like when you have a video event, for example, some people might think, I want to have a different event for every video. No, you definitely want to use parameters because you'll have a video play event. And then the parameters for that event that further describe the event will have things like the video title, how far they were in the video, where was the location of it, and that sort of thing. So really thinking about what are the things that can help us record if people are doing the things that we want them to do? And then are there ways that we can record what might have stopped them from doing the thing that we want them to do? So a really common event that I record is if a call to action was even viewed. So could people see the purchase button? Could people see your form? Did it actually show up at all in the user's window when they were looking at your website? Did they even scroll down enough to see that call to action? And being able to record the stuff that might have stopped them from being able to complete this action. We also record things like JavaScript errors that popped up in the console. Maybe they couldn't fill the form because the form was broken. Being able to record those sorts of things as well, I think is really one of the great things about GA4 is being able to record so much more data than you used to be able to. But it does require a little bit of knowing Google Tag Manager in some cases. And so that's also, where people can get hung up. Although I do have a blog post on my website, we can link to this in the show notes, where I talk about how you can record clicks on specific buttons without using Google Tag Manager. So if you want to do that, you don't want to learn Google Tag Manager, which is fair, we'll have a link to that post in the show notes as well, and I'll show you how to do that.
Yeah, I realize that it's very difficult to talk about Google Analytics just in an audio format because there's just so much stuff that we can be showing. But so definitely check out the links provided on the page. I wanted to talk about the importance of aligning your analytics with the business goals. And in terms of GA4 implementation, is there a way of setting this up properly, or is there a way that businesses can handle this themselves? How can businesses like agencies ensure that their GA4 implementation is set up to provide actionable data that directly ties in with what the clients are seeking?
Yeah, so something that we always do with our clients when we start working with them is we create what's called a goal charter. I also have a post on this. We'll also make sure to share that as well. And the point of the goal charter is to find out from the client, like, what's your business goals? But then also, how can we break these goals down into KPIs and then eventually metrics? And that really tells us these are the things that we need to make sure we're measuring. And maybe it's simple stuff like, are people getting in touch? Okay, cool. Recording a form submission, that's important. But what are the other things that we can record that will help us know if people didn't do the thing that we wanted them to do? And that's where I think that's really thinking about it in terms of a spectrum of, I joke about calling like the hierarchy of analytics needs, like the hierarchy of needs out in the world. We have shelter at the bottom and you have like art at the end, right? So the analytics hierarchy of needs is, step 0 is you don't have analytics, which I still have talked to some people who just don't have it and they just are getting started with it. And step 1 would be you have it and you barely look at it, or it's just the default settings, right? And then step 5, the galaxy brain side of that is where you have all of your different systems all integrated, talking to each other. You have a data scientist on staff, you have a customer data platform, right? A lot of businesses are in step 1 and 2. Step 1 being, I have analytics. I look at it sometimes when I have to. And step 2 is I have analytics and I have a report and it pulls in data from different places like ads, et cetera, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. And I think that that's where really thinking about where you are in that spectrum, like don't feel like you have to go to a customer data platform and have all your systems talking to each other when literally at this point you are just crawling, right? You are just getting started with analytics. So don't feel like you look at someone else, you're like, oh, I should have all these things set up. Like just work through what you have right now. Start by looking at the events you're already recording and thinking to yourself, what else would I need to know in order to know if our website is doing a good job of turning leads into closed business, however that matters for you. Like however that process happens. And so that's where you can think about things like, well, can I do things to make sure I'm tying together, the visit in GA4 to what's happening in our CRM? That's one step you could take. Or another step could be like, I just want to record if people are clicking on these buttons. Are people scrolling down the page? Sometimes for things like scroll, for example, the default scroll in GA4 is 90% depth, but 90% can be a long way, especially if you write long blog posts the way we do. So one of the things that we record on our website is every image that is viewed. So as you scroll down the page, as images load in, we record an event and then we know exactly how far you got down the page and we can see where you found it, not as compelling, for example. And then there's other features in GA4 beyond just recording that are things like audiences. So I often will set up audiences for things like people viewing specific location pages for location-based businesses, or people engaging with key blog posts, or people coming to the website multiple times in a fixed time period. And then I can see, if people viewed this key blog post or viewed this key page 3 times in the last 90 days, they should convert. And if they weren't, then what are the things that this particular audience of people who should really be converting at a higher rate than general site visitors to the site as a whole, what are they doing? Where are they getting hung up? What, are there pages that people who convert view? And then pages that people who don't convert, they don't view those pages. That's where audiences can really come in as well to help you figure out what's going on. And I think that GA4 audiences, and I have a video on this we can share as well that I did for Moz a while back. I think setting up audiences based on those key persona groups or key sets of micro conversions essentially can really help you determine if you're serving your customers in the way that you should be.
I have a question about how you basically decide what data to track. Do you talk with the client and look at what they need, or do you specifically look at the capabilities of analytics tool like GA4 to see what information it can give you? Or like to rephrase the question, is there anything that the tool can't do? Or like if I decide that I want to keep track of something very specific, is it available in GA4, or do you work it the other way around? Like, okay, this is what I can do in GA4 and this is the information that I'm going to provide to your business.
I usually start just thinking, what do I want to track? And then I figure out if it's possible. And I'm really stubborn. I like trying to figure out things. I'm like, oh, well, no one has an answer for this. Great. I'm going to figure it out. The reality is that it is just data, and it's up to you to decide like what you're going to get in there and what you're going to record for it. And I think when I talk to clients too about reporting, I say, forget anything that you've learned, forget all the reports you've seen before. If you're asking a question of your data, what is the question that you're asking? Don't think about it in terms of like sessions by channel or whatever it might be, right? Your question is, which channels bring the most valuable clients to our website? Then that gives me a sense of, okay, so what you said there was which channel. So I need to make sure our attribution is working. And that means that we need to have great UTM tagging, for example, making sure that everybody's using the UTMs the way that they should. And then you said valuable as well. So one of the other things I need to know is how can I make sure that I am recording the value of a transaction? And if you don't sell stuff online, for example, even for yourself, right? You can buy the tool online. But if you have clients who say want an enterprise tool, that's an offline conversation, right? So then how do you record how people got to you originally, who then end up purchasing the enterprise level tool? And that's where you can start to get into the tricky, well, how am I going to record this information? And so often what I'll do is there's something called the client ID in GA4. And so that's your unique identifier for your specific device. And if you're just getting started in this process, one thing you can do is you can take that client ID, save it in a hidden field, and then carry it through into wherever your CRM is. And then once someone is closed, you can tie it back to GA4 and say, oh, okay, so this person came in originally via this paid ad or whatever it might be. Now, it doesn't work as well if, say, you're in a B2B context where you have, say, account-based marketing, because obviously people are going to be using lots of different devices. But if you're in, say, home services, you're in pest control and people come to your website because they have a lot of ants in their house and they just want you to come and deal with it right away, those people are going to visit 18 times before they convert. Nobody's like idly wondering who their local pest control company is, right? Like, people get in touch with you because they have a problem and they want you to kill the spiders in your house, right? So in that case, they're going to contact you right away. And so being able to record that, this is where they came from, this was the ultimate value of that transaction when we finished the job, being able to tie that together is a really key thing to spend your time on. And so this can help you focus down and say, all right, so this part here, this is your number one question. That means that I need to figure out a way to tie this together. Don't worry about other stuff like scroll depth and people clicking on CTAs and stuff. If that's the number one question that you have at your company or your client has, then your job is to figure out channels. So you got to have a great UTM tagging strategy, and you need to make sure that you're recording the value of that transaction ultimately. And those are the two things that you should focus on first in your analytics plan.
GA4's explorations feature has been highlighted as a powerful tool. Could you walk us through how agencies can use it to uncover hidden insights or trends in their data?
Yeah, I really like explorations, although it feels a tiny bit half-baked. And the other thing too, I have to say, like, whenever I talk about GA4, whenever I do a GA4 workshop, I always start by saying what I am saying right now could change in like an hour or a day or a week. So when we are recording this at the end of October 2024, and you listen to this in like, I don't know, February, don't be surprised if you go and you're like, this is different than what Dana said. It was right as of right now, although it could be changing. I was doing a workshop in Australia and literally the user interface changed halfway through the workshop. And it's just like, that's GA4 for you. I guess it'll keep me in business for a while. But what I would say about explorations is that my favorite explorations, because I have favorites because I'm a nerd, are path, and I really like the funnel exploration as well. Those are the two that I find I use the most, especially with clients. And I find that that's because they are really the most visual. And so again, I say clients, but if you're working in-house, you really like your boss, your team, they're your clients. You're kind of like, because there isn't necessarily anybody else at your company maybe who does this, or you have a very small team, but the rest of the company doesn't necessarily understand what you do. So you are kind of like an agency floating by yourself inside this larger organization. And so what I really like about path analysis, the very first thing when you go into path is there's a start over button up at the top right. Click that, because that means that you can either start the path at a starting point, such as a specific event or a page that was viewed, or you can create a path that ends at a specific point, such as a conversion event or a really key page. And then you can click back to see what pages that they viewed in order to get to that page. I find that this is a really interesting visual tool. It is a little bit more, I would say, qualitative than quantitative when it comes to being able to evaluate the data. But it is really interesting to see, like, how did people get here? And one of the things, for example, we saw, I was just doing this yesterday for a client, we were trying to figure out why we were seeing a lot of people like not necessarily filling out the contact page on their first visit. And we took a look and we realized that when we did the path analysis for people viewing that contact page, the step before was what's called not set. And if you see not set showing up in your reports, those are people who had a tab open. And I'm sure lots of people, you have lots of tabs open right now, and then left the tab open, but let the session time out. By default, GA4 sessions time out after 30 minutes. So when you come back again, if you scroll down to the bottom, let's say you have a scroll event that fires, but because the page didn't reload, there is no other information. So it looks like the session shows up as what's called not set. So we saw not set, and then we clicked on not set, and we saw the view of the contact page. So to me, that path means that someone viewed the contact page, was going to fill it out, thought, oh, I got to talk to my spouse about like the best time I want them to come by, and then filled out the contact form eventually. But there was that delay that happened in there. So is that something that we can do something about to encourage people to just get in touch and we'll book an appointment later? Is there a way that we can make sure that they don't leave that tab open and forget about it later on? Is there something that we can do to encourage that? For some of our clients, for example, we've done things like if people go to leave a tab, we're like, hey, don't go away, just give us your information and we'll follow up with you the next day or something like that. So taking a look at that kind of stuff in path analysis can be good. And then for funnel, when people think about funnel, they think about e-commerce, right? Is, they put the thing in the cart, they checked out, they put in the payment information, etc. And I use funnels for all sorts of things that aren't e-commerce, such as views of key pages. So they started on the site, they viewed this key page, They did this thing that we wanted them to do. You know, what are the steps that people take before they actually convert? Do they have to download a product data sheet? Is there a form that they contact to get in touch with your sales team? And so those can also be steps in your funnel. And one of the great things in GA4 that I really like about their funnels is you can view the elapsed time that it takes between each stage. And so, for example, going back to this client with the contact form, we want the amount of time it takes for them to view that contact form to them actually filling out the contact form to be as short as possible, because we just want them to go ahead and do it. And so we could make one step be viewing the contact form page, and then the next step be the actual event that is fired when someone fills out that contact form. And then looking at the elapsed time, we can also break it down by channel or by device. And we could see, for example, that people who are on desktop were far more likely to leave that tab open for a long time, whereas people on mobile were just like ready to go, probably because they were standing in their basement thinking, I want someone to come and kill these ants immediately, right? But someone on desktop, maybe they're just like in for a more not as urgent treatment for their house, for example, right? So that can also give us some sort of behavior metrics. We can say, well, is there a way we can encourage people to get in touch faster? Is there something else we can change in this form? And so that really gives you a starting point and insights to how to improve things to increase that conversion rate.
Appreciated that answer, Dana. Do you agree that to fully unlock the potential of GA4 and its insights, it should be integrated with other platforms? And a follow-up to that question is, do marketers now need to learn SQL?
I don't know. It's the big thing about GA4s, they're like, oh, but it connects with BigQuery. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have time to learn BigQuery. I don't have a data scientist sitting under my desk. You know, it's funny because one of my first software jobs actually was working for a Microsoft Access database company. And so I'd learned SQL for that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, SQL doesn't change all that much depending upon the platform. It's just slightly different flavors. But if you're coming at this from like a creative background and you did not do data science in school, like I have one course I took in stats because I had to, and it was statistics for geographers. It was about things like flow rates for rivers, right? It was not how to determine if something is statistically significant. And so I think that this is where, again, if Google is approaching this from an analyst perspective and they're thinking about people at big businesses who do have data scientists, who do have people who have that expertise, who can just go in there and do things, but you don't have that expertise, you can feel like you're like, oh, well, this tool is not for me. So I don't think you have to learn it. I think if you do, great. But at the same time, again, thinking back to that hierarchy of analytics is like, is this where you need to start, or the basics just like, I need to record some events beyond the basic events that come built in with GA4, and I can worry about SQL later. So if you do want to learn BigQuery for GA4, there's a fantastic course run by Simo Hava and Johan van der Werken, which is on teamsimmer.com, BigQuery for GA4. I really, really recommend it. I think it's 600 euros. And they have sales sometimes. It's honestly the best money I've spent. And I live in Canada, so 600 euros for me is like a lot because our exchange rate is very bad. But I would say, like, definitely if you do want to learn this, check out that course. It is totally worth your money. They go through everything from start to finish. And so, yeah, I would say it's a fantastic course to check out.
With cookies on their way out, what alternative approaches can agencies use to capture valuable privacy compliant data? And how does GA4 address these issues to help businesses remain compliant?
Yeah, I would say with cookies, I mean, I love how Google was like, just kidding, we're not actually going to get rid of cookies after all. But I think marketers forget that tools like Safari have not had cookies for a while in that same way that Chrome does. So really, if you're thinking about like multi-touch attribution, only Chrome data is accurate because cookies are dumped on Safari after 7 days. So we haven't had accurate data from Safari in a while. This is not just a Chrome issue. This is just an industry-wide issue. And particularly, you know, you're in the European Union, you see consent dialogues all the time. And what I see working mostly with clients in Canada and the United States is a lot of them are like, yeah, they said no to being tracked, but we're going to track them anyway. Like, no, you can't do that. I don't think they quite take it seriously yet. I think the, GDPR fines need to come down to some American companies before they start to do that.
I was expecting you to say that the North Americans are way more law obedient. This is like comes out of nowhere for me.
Oh my goodness. No, absolutely not. Oh, have you met Americans? No, please don't come for me on social media. No, I find it's also like a lack of understanding. And in the States, there are, California has their California Consumer Privacy Act, right? So there are some protection laws that are coming into place, but I think certainly it's behind where it is in Europe, where GDPR has been out for quite a while now. And I think people understand it. The most often what I see is people think that just slapping a consent banner on their website is sufficient, but don't realize the consent banner actually has to communicate with your analytics program to tell it what to put and not put based on what people have selected for consent. So there's a lot of people out there who are grabbing unconsented data accidentally and just not realizing it. And like large companies, it's one very large company. I was looking at their website and they actually sent a Facebook conversion event off when you said no to being tracked because they didn't set it up properly. Right. So there's that for sure. And then I think if you're looking at the data and you're saying, well, 80% of people are saying no, so I'm only working with 20% of my data. What can I possibly do? This sucks. You just got to track the heck out of those 20 people who said yes. Right. And I think too, part of it is analytics has not been accurate for a very long time. And I'm not just talking about consent. I'm talking about things like Safari, where it does clear cookies after 7 days, or people using ad blockers, which there's a new version of Chrome coming out, which will make ad blockers slightly less effective, but they're still there. And the reality is that if people don't want to be tracked, just don't try to force tracking on them. A lot of people think, well, you can do server-side tagging, which you can, get around ad blockers. Yeah, but that's just like a small percentage of the population sometimes, and doesn't really fix the inherent problem, which is that people don't want to be tracked. So if someone does let you track them, track everything you can, and then hopefully you can extrapolate that out to the larger percentage of the whole. But then also when you present your results, don't present them as exact numbers, because those numbers are not exact and they are not accurate. And I have another post, of course, on this called Market analytics data is wrong. Can it be fixed? Spoiler alert, no, it cannot be fixed. But I talk about some techniques there in terms of reporting. So for example, in Looker Studio, when I'm presenting very large numbers, such as the number of sessions or conversions over a year, I might round those numbers. So instead of saying 18,640, I might say, 18,600. Because the other thing that happens too is, and I see this a lot with Shopify websites, for example, people have an ad blocker. And then Shopify, of course, will record people making the purchase, because you can't hide that you spent money and here's the order number. But if you have an ad blocker, you can hide it from GA4. And so you should always have, for example, more revenue showing up in Shopify itself than you would see in GA4. And you can't recapture those people. They're just gone. And that's okay. Having 90% of your data show up in GA4 compared to what you see in Shopify, that's actually really good. And that means that lots of people are letting you track them. And you should be happy about that, as opposed to complaining about those 10% of people who aren't letting you track them. Just do what you can with what you've got, and just accept you're not going to be able to track everything, because you will drive yourself crazy if you try to track absolutely everyone. It's just not possible.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that GA4 was more an analytics, not a reporting tool. And just in the most recent reply, you said that you use Looker Studio to present data from GA4. And my question is, this is something that I've been hearing from a couple of my colleagues, is that they're struggling to get their Google Search Console data to look anything like GA4, at least so they're speaking at least the same language. Do you have any tips on how to reconcile that data?
You really can't, because Google Search Console data is also inaccurate. They don't give you 100% of that data. So you've got one system that isn't giving you 100% of the data, and you've got another system that's giving you 100% of the data, and you try to mash it together, and it's like bad times bad equals even worse, right? So I think that that's where, with Google Search Console, you're looking at trends, not absolutes, and really think about it in that way. And so in that post that I mentioned about marketing analytics data being wrong, one of the things that I've really started focusing on quite a lot in our reports to clients is, instead of presenting numbers, we're presenting percentage of total. So which keywords are the most percentage of total when it comes to clicks through to the website? Which landing pages are the biggest percentage of total when it comes to people landing on your website? Out of those, which one has the best percentage of total of people actually getting in touch or purchasing or whatever your ultimate conversions are? And I think really looking at it that way, instead of looking at saying, well, Search Console said I had 18 clicks and I go into GA4 and it says I only had 6. Which system is wrong? They're both wrong. They're wrong in different ways. And I think you really you're going to drive yourself crazy. Just look at the trends. Don't look at the absolutes.
Beyond GA4, are there any other analytics tools or strategies that you can recommend for digital businesses and agencies that will help them stay ahead in search? And maybe you recommend certain tools that will complement GA4 so that we get a more holistic view of the performance of a website in search.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I work with lots of people who use Matomo, for example, which is also a great analytics tool. Another one is Fathom, which is actually made here where I live on Vancouver Island. And I think really what analytics tool you use is entirely up to you. I'm not here to be like, you have to use GA4 or else. You do have to use GA4 if you're using Google Ads, because there are integration features that are unfortunately only really work with GA4 and Google Ads. So if you're running Google Ads, you kind of need to run GA4, but that doesn't mean you can't also run Matomo or Fathom or whatever, Adobe Analytics or whatever you want as well. I think really the principles of good reporting and good analytics tracking apply regardless of the platform you're using. So really thinking about, what is the information that will help me tell if this person is going to do the thing I want them to do or couldn't do the thing that I want them to do. And then ultimately, when it comes to reporting, no one tool is going to be more accurate than another. There's not one tool that's magically better. Every tool has the same, ups and downs in terms of recording. None of them are ever going to be 100% accurate. So instead thinking about, how can I report on trends as opposed to absolutes? And if you've been reporting on absolutes for years and that's what your leadership or your clients expect of you, just start to change like one or two reporting elements to focus on trends. And then slowly over time, eventually you can switch over to trend based. And if people ask, start to explain this stuff. Talk to them about how they engage with stuff and how they choose to book products. And so the example I often say is, I needed to book pest control for my house because we have ants that come in every year if we don't spray. And so I looked up some options, but I wasn't going to be home. So I texted the link to the place I thought was good to my wife, and she booked. The problem is that when I texted the link to her, the attribution was lost. So even though I came to their website via their Google business profile originally, it looks like direct when she actually ended up booking the service. And if they asked me where I came from, I would say a Google search, but they never asked. So is there something that you can do to like follow up to try to, plug some of those holes in your strategy? Or do you just kind of accept that like, yeah, people do weird stuff on the internet and there's not a way to necessarily track all this stuff? Like really trying to keep your eye on the prize and focus on what matters as opposed to, getting bogged down in little details that ultimately aren't necessarily going to move the needle for your business.
One of my last questions is about AI. It's on everybody's lips for, a year or more. Yeah. And the question is, do you think that Google, with the different tools that it's rolling out, like Gemini, do you think that it's working on some sort of element that we can have a chat style conversation with Google Analytics at some point?
I think it will be a thing that happens at some point for sure. And they do try to say, you can ask this now of GA4, but if you've tried, it's not very good. And even Gemini isn't really good. Either. I definitely, my favorite AI tool of choice right now is Claude. I have to say I'm really enjoying that one the best. So what I do now is I'll export data from GA4, put it in Claude, and then ask questions of Claude. And I think that if you're not doing that with your analysis, definitely try that out because it's a really easy way to start to get a little bit more information. And so sometimes, for example, I'll download GA4 data, download Google Search Console data, get Claude to put it together for me and pull out some insights from that, which is always really interesting. I think for sure at some point there has to be, I think Google will get left behind. AI is what businesses have to have now, or they feel like they're getting outdated for better or for worse. I don't know if every single site needs AI attached to it. I feel like it's an investor thing now is they're I heard AI is the thing. You got to put AI in here. It's we use ClickUp for our project management. I don't need AI in ClickUp. I don't need it shown to me on every single option. I just want to use our project management tool, right? But I think eventually there will be a conversational based thing. But again, the setup is going to really matter because you can ask questions of the data, but if you haven't set it up right or you don't understand what that means when somebody says what is a user, which is typically a device, or what is a session? It's 30 minutes, for example, if you don't know those definitions, then the data that you get out of your conversation isn't necessarily going to tell you what you think it's telling you. So it is still important to learn the basics behind it. It's when I think about AI, I think about it like using a calculator in math class. When you first start learning math, you don't use calculators. You have to learn, I don't know if you still learn long division or not, but back in my day, we did, but you still learn how to do math without a calculator. And then once you've gotten to the point where you have the basics down, then you use the calculator. Same thing with analytics, right? You should still have the basics down. And then once you've got the basics down, then you can use the calculator as in using AI to ask it questions to help you get that just a little bit further beyond what you could do on pen and paper.
That is such a great transition to my almost last question is, if you were keeping track of analytics today, what advice would you give to yourself?
Oh boy, learn SQL. No, I'm kidding. I think I spent too long. I would say actually the thing that I always struggled with when I was learning analytics was regex and JavaScript, because there is a lot you do end up doing a lot of work with regex, especially with reporting in Looker Studio to be able to filter down to specific items. And then if you're working in Tag Manager, JavaScript is what runs a lot of the stuff. If people click on this button or I want to record this piece of information, you do need to learn a little bit of JavaScript for that. But AI can write a lot of that for you now. I don't write my own regex anymore. I just ask AI to do it. So if you're just getting started in analytics, you're I have to learn this regex stuff. No, you don't. Just ask AI to do it for you. And then the thing that I find the most helpful is have an example of your data when you're asking it for the regex, an example of what you want it to do at the end of the data. So if you're saying, I have a full URL and I just want the path part of the URL with the domain name cut off, upload a few examples of the original data and upload a few examples of what you would want the data to look like at the end of it. And then it will give you the regex for it. So just, save yourself the time and suffering. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I appreciate our talk, Dana. The very last question is, how can people find you? Where can they find more information about analytics, read more of your content? Maybe you have a course.
Oh, I sure do. Yep. So I have two courses, Analytics for Agencies and Practical GA4. And you can use the code SE Ranking to get 20% off either of those courses. And of course, I'm tracking that. The other things too is I would say I'm most active on LinkedIn if you want to follow me there. If you go to kpplaybook.com/newsletter, we have a bi-weekly newsletter where we send out lots of tips. And right now, when you sign up for the newsletter, we're also sending out our, I think it's 20-page UTM guide, which takes you through how to use UTMs in GA4 start to finish, and also includes a spreadsheet so you can start tracking your own UTMs as well. So if you feel like you have a lot of stuff showing up in that unassigned channel, which is where good traffic goes to die, you definitely need better UTM tracking. So check out the UTM guide for sure.
Well, thank you, Dana. This has been a very insightful talk. And I want to basically do the sign off and say that today, Dana DiTomaso shared with us her vast experience on working with analytics tools like GA4 and how we can leverage them to get actionable insights. Hope our listeners are already thinking about how they can set up GA4 accounts properly. And I want to remind them to reach out to Dana if you feel like you need help at any point. Once again, thank you, Dana, for being here and for doing the talk with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And to our listeners, I want to thank them for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and join the next episode of the Do Follow podcast.